My name is Selena Lawson. I'm 30 years old. Last Tuesday, I sat in my office in Portland and listened to 43 voicemails from my family, people I hadn't spoken to in 7 years. Not one of them said I'm sorry. Every single one said the same 2 words. 7 years ago, I walked out of my mother's house with $200, one suitcase, and the clothes on my back. My family told everyone in our town I was unstable, that I needed professional help, that they were worried sick. They weren't worried. They were relieved. And they would have stayed relieved if my sister hadn't Googled my name last week. Let me take you back to Thanksgiving 2019, the night everything broke. Ridgewood, Ohio, population 4,000 and change, the kind of town where everybody knows your business before you do. Thanksgiving at the Lawson house meant my mother's china on the long table, 15 relatives squeezed elbow to elbow, and my father pouring wine like silence was something you could drown. I was 23, working 2 jobs, waiting tables and answering phones at a real estate office downtown, saving every cent. My sister Meredith had just been promoted to marketing coordinator at a regional insurance firm. Same salary, new title. My mother stood at the head of the table and made a toast. To Meredith, our shining star, always making this family proud. 15 people raised their glasses. I raised mine too. Nobody asked what I was doing. Nobody asked about my classes, my savings, my plans. I was wallpaper in my own family's house. I'd come to that dinner with one question. I waited until dessert, when the noise had settled into that warm hum of relatives talking over each other. "Mom," I said, "I was wondering, is there any money left in Grandma Ruth's education fund?" She told me she set aside money for each of us. The table went quiet, the kind of quiet that tells you a grenade just rolled under your chair. My mother set her coffee cup down slowly, looked at me, then looked at every single person at that table, and when she spoke her voice was sweet enough to rot teeth. "See, this is what I've been dealing with. She's been acting erratic for months." I didn't respond. I sat there with pumpkin pie going cold on my plate and 15 pairs of eyes landing on me like I'd cursed in church. My aunt patted my hand and told me my mother just wanted what was best. I excused myself, went to the kitchen, started washing dishes, because that's what I did at every family gathering. The faucet was running, but I could still hear voices through the doorway. My mother's voice dropped low, talking to my aunt. "Ruth's fund went to Meredith's sorority dues and her car. Selena doesn't need it. She's not going anywhere anyway." I turned the water off. Grandma Ruth had set up education accounts for both of us, $12,000 each. She told me this herself 2 years before she passed, sat me down at her kitchen table, held my hands, and said, "This is for your future, sweetheart. Nobody can touch it but you." Somebody had touched it. I walked back into the dining room. "That money was mine," I said. "Grandma left it for me. You had no right." My mother didn't flinch. She set the bottle down, folded her hands, and tilted her head the way she always did when she was about to rewrite reality. "You're being dramatic, Selena. You always make everything about money. I'm asking about $12,000 that was left to me by name. And I'm telling you, you sound just like your grandmother, always stirring things up." That stopped me, because Grandma Ruth was the kindest person I ever knew, and my mother said her name like something to scrape off her shoe. 10 minutes later, my mother called everyone into the living room. I'd seen this play before. "I've tried to keep this private," she said, dabbing at her eye with a napkin, "but I think everyone needs to know. Selena hasn't been well. She's been having episodes. I've been covering for her, but tonight." She gestured toward me like I was Exhibit A. I looked at my father. He sat in his recliner staring at the carpet and said nothing. I looked at my brother Kyle, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, giving a small nod, not to me, to her. I looked at Meredith. She was scrolling her phone. 15 relatives in that room, and not one of them asked if I was okay. I went upstairs, packed a suitcase, $200 in tip money, a winter coat, and a small wooden box my grandmother had left me that I'd kept on my dresser for 2 years without opening, because opening it meant admitting she was really gone. I walked through the living room. My mother's voice followed me to the door. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." I didn't slam it. I closed it gently because I knew I'd never open it again. Outside, snow was falling on Ridgewood, Ohio. I had a suitcase, $200, and nowhere to go. That was the last time I heard my mother's voice for 7 years. I bought a Greyhound ticket. The furthest I could get for what I had was Portland, Oregon, 38 hours on a bus with my suitcase between my knees and a box of my dead grandmother's things on my lap. I didn't sleep, just watched America scroll past the window and tried to remember the last time someone in my family had asked me a question that wasn't a complaint dressed up in a question mark. I couldn't. A woman next to me, heading to Boise to see her grandkids, offered me half a sandwich outside Omaha. She didn't ask why I was crying, just handed me a napkin and looked out the window. Sometimes strangers give you more grace in 10 seconds than your family manages in 23 years. I spent my first night in Portland at a women's shelter, the second week in a hostel that smelled like bleach and bad decisions. No credit history, no references, no local connections, just a work ethic my family had spent 23 years exploiting and 0 years appreciating. I found a job within 2 weeks, receptionist at a small consulting firm called Hale & Associates, 8 employees, a cramped office in the Pearl District helping communities apply for development grants. It wasn't glamorous. It was a paycheck. 3 weeks into my new life, I checked Facebook for the first and last time. My mother had posted in the family group, "Please keep Selena in your prayers. She's going through a difficult time, and we just hope she's safe wherever she is. Our door is always open." 112 reactions, dozens of comments praising her as such a strong mother. Kyle's comment sat at the top. She always was the dramatic one. I deleted Facebook that night and didn't look back. No contact cost plenty when you're 23 with nothing. No savings, no health insurance, no emergency contact on any form. I wrote N/A for 2 years until I had someone worth listing. No birthday calls, no Christmas cards, no one to tell when I got the flu so bad I couldn't get off the bathroom floor for 2 days. And the thing nobody warns you about, the permanent low hum of knowing that somewhere in Ohio 15 people are telling a story about you that you can't correct a single word of. I was the family ghost, the cautionary tale my mother told at church brunches, the reason she could dab her eyes and collect sympathy like change in a jar. But silence also gave me something. The first morning I really woke up in Portland, not startled awake by anxiety, I realized something was missing. It took a full minute to identify it. My mother's voice, that constant internal narration that I wasn't enough, had gone quiet, like someone had finally found the off switch on a radio I'd been hearing my whole life. At Hale & Associates, Margaret Hale noticed me before I noticed myself. I'd reorganized the entire client filing system in my first week, 3 years of scattered folders, cross-referenced and color-coded. Nobody asked me to. I just couldn't stand the chaos. Margaret stopped at my desk on a Friday. "Who reorganizes 3 years of files in 4 days?" "Someone who needed something to control," I said. She didn't laugh, didn't pity me, just pulled up a chair and said, "Tell me what else you see that's broken." While I filed grants in Portland, my mother was filing her version of me back in Ridgewood. I learned this later, from my Aunt Patricia, from an old friend who tracked me down years after. Within a month of my leaving, my mother had told the women's ministry at church that I was receiving care at a residential facility. She never said which one. She didn't need to, because in a town like that, the blank fills itself in with the worst version. My old apartment above the hardware store, my sister took over, sold my furniture, kept my coats, told the landlord I'd abandoned the lease. My father handled the neighbors, standing in the driveway saying, "We just hope she's safe wherever she is," voice cracking at exactly the right moment. He never called me, not once. Kyle posted vague, pointed statuses online for years. Family isn't about blood, it's about loyalty. Some people would rather run than grow up. Each one got dozens of likes, each one about me. For 7 years I was a ghost, and they wrote the obituary while I was still breathing. Year 1 in Portland was survival. Year 2 was the first time I made a plan that belonged to me. I moved from reception to project coordination in 6 months. Margaret gave me a small grant application to manage, a community garden project, and I turned it in 3 days early with a revised budget that saved the client 11%. She handed me a second project. I enrolled in Portland State's online business administration program, classes at night, work during the day, tuition paid out of every paycheck in small bites, no loans. My apartment was a shared two-bedroom with a roommate who worked nights. I cooked every meal, bought clothes secondhand, cut my own hair for 2 years. There was no montage, just alarm clocks and spreadsheets, falling asleep with a textbook open on my chest, and waking up to do it again. I didn't have a plan to become successful. I had a plan to never feel powerless again. The success was a side effect. When I caught a billing error that would have cost the firm $6,000, Margaret promoted me to junior consultant. "You caught something my accountant missed," she said. "I check everything twice," I told her. "It's how I grew up." She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. Margaret understood that the hungriest workers are the ones who've been starving the longest, and the best thing you can do is stop talking about their hunger and keep putting food on the table. I finished my degree at the end of year 3, no ceremony, just a diploma printed at a copy shop and framed for $10, hung above my desk. Margaret saw it the next morning and offered me a promotion to project manager. The firm had grown from 8 people to 35, expanding into housing development consulting and grant writing for tribal communities. That same month, Jess Parker walked through our front door for an interview, sharp, funny, recently burned out of nonprofit work in Seattle. We connected immediately, not over work, but over the thing neither of us usually talked about. 3 weeks into her employment, eating takeout at my desk after a late deadline, she asked why I never mentioned family. I told her everything, the Thanksgiving, the fund, the voicemails that never came, the door closing behind me in the snow. It was the first time I'd said it all out loud. She was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Yeah, mine told people I died. Car accident." Easier than telling their church friends their daughter was gay. We sat with that for a long time, and then I cried, for the first time since leaving Ohio. On my 28th birthday, I opened the box. 5 years I'd carried it, from the shelter to the hostel to my own apartment, sitting on my nightstand every night, untouched, because opening it meant admitting Grandma Ruth was gone and that she was the only person in my family who had loved me without conditions. Just pushed me to finally do it. Inside was a strand of pearls she wore to church every Sunday, a photograph of me at 6 years old grinning with a gap in my teeth, the only childhood photo of me I owned, and a letter folded once in her careful, shaky handwriting. "Selena, if you're reading this, it means you had the courage to leave." Good. I wanted to leave my whole life, but I was afraid. Don't be like me. Don't hold this family together at the cost of yourself. You don't owe anyone your life. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. All those years I'd thought I was honoring her wish to keep the family together because she'd said it at every holiday, in front of my mother, under my mother's roof. This letter, hidden in a box like contraband, was what she'd actually meant. There was a postscript about the education fund. I left instructions with my lawyer, Mr. Weatherby. Ask Patricia, she knows. Year 6, Margaret offered me a title I'd never imagined, Chief Operating Officer. The firm had grown to 120 employees across 2 offices. Our programs had touched over 50,000 families across the Pacific Northwest, and we'd been recognized by the governor's office. I wasn't rich. I drove a used Subaru, lived in a 1-bedroom, had a retirement account and health insurance that covered dental. By Ridgewood standards, I was doing fine. By my own standards, the girl who'd slept in a shelter, I was breathing air I never thought I'd reach. A regional business magazine ran a profile on women in community development leadership that October, my photo, my name, my title, the sanitized version of my story. Margaret threw a small office party. My life was quiet, steady, full of people who respected me and work that mattered. I didn't look for my family online. I didn't send anonymous checks. I let them go completely. For 7 years they let me go too, not a single call, not a letter. My mother told the town I was in a facility and the town believed her, and nobody thought to check, nobody Googled my name. Until a random Tuesday in March, when my sister, for the first time in her life, typed it into a search engine. She wasn't looking for me. She was looking for money. 6 months before the voicemails, an email arrived in my work inbox from my Aunt Patricia. She'd watched everything happen to me and said nothing for years, and I'd held that against her almost as much as the rest of it. Her message was 3 paragraphs, no excuses. She said she'd been afraid of my mother, that your mother has a way of making people disappear from her life, and I wasn't brave enough to be next. Then she told me something that made my jaw tighten. Grandma Ruth's education fund had been handled by a lawyer in Columbus, with clear instructions: $12,000 to Meredith, $12,000 to me, separate accounts requiring separate signatures. My mother had forged my signature, consolidated both accounts, and moved everything to Meredith. Patricia knew because she'd witnessed the original documents. I didn't file charges. The statute of limitations in Ohio was 6 years, long gone. The money wasn't life-changing anymore. I made that in a quarter by my 2nd year at the firm. But the forgery, the deception, the fact that my mother stole from me and then called me crazy for asking about it, that was the architecture of my entire childhood in one transaction. Patricia added one more thing. Your mother is chairing the Ridgewood Community Fundraiser this spring. The whole town will be there. 2 months later, Margaret came into my office holding her phone. A pastor in some small town in Ohio was on the board of a community development nonprofit, doing a big annual fundraiser, and wanted a keynote speaker with a personal connection to small-town revitalization. He'd reached out through our network and she'd recommended me. The town is Ridgewood, I said. She didn't know my family, didn't know the fundraiser's chair was the same woman who'd told 200 people her daughter was in rehab. I almost said no. Then I thought about Grandma Ruth's letter, about closing that door in the snow, about 7 years of being a ghost in a story I didn't write. I'll do it, I said. I went back to Ridgewood on my own terms, through my own front door. 2 weeks before the fundraiser, my sister sat down at her kitchen table and typed my name into Google. I know the details because Patricia was there. Meredith was 32, freshly divorced, drowning. Her ex had taken the dog, half the savings, and all the ambition. Her mortgage was 3 months behind and the bank was circling. She needed a cosigner for a new loan, and everyone closer to her was tapped out. My mother's credit was wrecked, my father was on Social Security, owed $40,000 in student loans. Meredith thought of me the way you think of a tool you tossed in a junk drawer years ago, not with affection, but with sudden practical interest. First result, LinkedIn, Chief Operating Officer. Second, a business magazine profile on rising Pacific Northwest leaders. Third, my company bio with a professional headshot and a quote from Margaret calling me the operational backbone of everything we'd built. Patricia said Meredith stared at the screen without blinking, then called our mother. Mom, you need to see this. She's a COO. She's been in Forbes. The sound on the other end was not joy or relief or pride. It was a sharp inhale, the kind a person makes when the story they've been telling for 7 years catches fire in their hands. That's impossible, my mother said, and couldn't finish the sentence, because finishing it meant admitting the lie had been hers all along. The calls started that evening. I was in a conference room wrapping up a quarterly review when my phone began buzzing and didn't stop. By the time the meeting ended, I had 43 missed calls from Ohio numbers. I closed my office door and listened. Meredith, breezy and practiced like she was calling about brunch. Listen, I need to talk to you about something important. My father, halting and uncomfortable, your mother and I. The family's been going through a rough patch. We could really use your help. My mother, clipped and controlled, I don't know what you've been doing out there, but family is family, we need to talk. Kyle, chewing something, looks like you're doing pretty good out there. I've got this business idea and could really use some backing. And near the end, Meredith again, the breeziness gone, her voice cracking, I need help. Please just call me, help me, help me. 2 words over and over in different voices, different levels of desperation, but always the same 2 words. Not I'm sorry, not I was wrong, not I miss you. Help me. 43 voicemails, 0 apologies, every single one wanting the same thing. I called Jess. My family found me, I said. Which part hurts? The part where I'm not surprised. I wasn't an ATM when I was 23 and broke, but apparently I'd become one now that I had a title next to my name. I set my phone to do not disturb. I didn't call back, didn't block the numbers either, because blocking felt like a reaction, and I was done reacting to people who'd never once reacted to me. They didn't take silence well. 3 days later, an email arrived in my professional inbox from my mother. After everything this family has done for you, you can't even return a phone call. I've spent 7 years defending you to people who asked where you were. I told them you were getting help, and this is how you repay me. I always told people you were selfish. I guess I was right. I read it twice and saved it, didn't reply. The next day, a LinkedIn message from Meredith. Congratulations, I guess, but family is family. I need a cosigner on a loan. You owe us that much. Then Kyle posted publicly on Facebook, tagging half the extended family. Funny how some people get a fancy title and forget where they came from. Family supported you your whole life, and now you're too good to answer your phone. I screenshotted everything, not for legal reasons, for myself, for the mornings I might wake up wondering if I'd imagined it all, if maybe I should have tried harder. Evidence I wasn't the problem. That evening, Patricia texted that they knew I was the fundraiser speaker and were planning to be there. Now I knew. They weren't just calling. They were coming. I flew into Columbus and drove southeast for 90 minutes through flat, gray Ohio farmland. Ridgewood looked smaller than I remembered. The hardware store, the diner, the white church steeple poking through bare trees. The community center on Maple Street was decorated like a wedding, white tablecloths, a banner reading "Building Tomorrow Together." 200 seats nearly full when I arrived through the speaker entrance. My badge read Selena Lawson, Chief Operating Officer, Hale and Associates, keynote speaker. Through the doorway, I could see my mother at the center table in a navy dress, greeting guests like she owned the building, my father quiet beside her, Meredith in a new outfit she probably couldn't afford, Kyle scrolling his phone near the buffet. My whole family, 20 feet away, with no idea who was about to take the stage. Pastor Daniel Briggs, who'd never met me and didn't know my history with the town, stepped to the podium at 7:15. He introduced me as someone who grew up in a small town, started her career from the ground up, and now served as chief operating officer of a firm that had impacted over 50,000 families across the Pacific Northwest. Please welcome Selena Lawson. I walked out into the spotlight, and for 1 second I was 23 again, standing in that living room while my mother told 15 people I was broken. Then I looked at the audience, and at the center table, for faces I knew better than any others on earth. My mother's smile evaporated. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She gripped the edge of the table with both hands, her knuckles white, her eyes darting sideways to see who was watching her reaction. Even in shock, her first instinct was audience management. My father set his water glass down so hard it sloshed onto the linen, his face going slack like a man remembering something terrible he'd done long ago. Meredith's hand flew to her chest, her mouth forming a word that never became sound. Kyle's fork froze in midair. 200 people, the same neighbors and church members and shopkeepers who'd been told for 7 years that I was unstable, who'd prayed for me on Sundays, who'd whispered about me at the post office, rose to their feet in a standing ovation. My mother sat frozen in the center of it, the only person in the room still in her chair. I delivered my keynote, 20 minutes on community development, funding structures, grant strategies, the power of grassroots organizing, professional and polished. Then, near the end, I shifted. I grew up in a small town like this one. Some of you might remember me. A murmur ran through the room. I left this town 7 years ago with $200 in a suitcase. I didn't leave because I wanted to, I left because staying was costing me something I couldn't afford to lose. I was told I was unstable, I was told I needed professional help. The truth is the help I needed was distance. And this career started because someone looked at me and saw a person, not a problem to manage, not a story to tell at church, a person. Community development isn't just about grants and infrastructure, it's about seeing people, really seeing them, not the version that's convenient, the actual person standing in front of you. I didn't name anyone, didn't point at my mother's table, didn't have to. A woman in the third row who'd taught me English in 10th grade pressed her hand to her mouth. Her husband turned and stared at my mother. The whispers started like a match catching. That's Diane's daughter, The one she said was an A. She's a COO. When I finished, the room stood again, longer this time, some people wiping their eyes. My mother didn't stand. She sat with her napkin clenched in both fists, her face the color of raw steak. The networking portion became something else entirely. People I hadn't seen in 7 years shook my hand, said they had no idea, said my grandmother would be so proud. My mother cut through the crowd with a smile so tight it looked bolted on, 20 people within earshot, performing rather than making a scene. "Selena, sweetheart, what a surprise. Why didn't you tell us you were coming?" I didn't step into the hug she offered. "You had my number," I said. 7 years. Her voice dropped. "You embarrassed this family, that speech of yours." I didn't name anyone, I said. If people drew conclusions, that's not my responsibility. Meredith appeared at her shoulder. "We've been trying to reach you. We need to talk about the family." "I heard your voicemails," I said. "All 43. Not one apology. Just help me." "That's not a family reaching out. That's a collection call." My father materialized, voice low, eyes on the floor. "Let's not do this here." "You had 7 years to not do this," I said. "You chose not to." Cole trailed behind, asking if I thought I was better than them now. "No," I said. "I think I'm done being less than you needed me to be." I nodded once to Pastor Briggs and walked toward the exit, steady, no running, no slamming. I'd done enough of that 7 years ago. I sat in my rental car for 20 minutes, watching people through the community center windows clustered near the door I'd walked through. The Whisper network was running at full capacity. I called Jess. "It's done," I said. I said what I needed to say. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm 30 years old for the first time." That night, I wrote one email, addressed to my mother, my father, Meredith, and Kyle. "I'm writing this once. I'm not co-signing any loan, not funding anyone's business idea, not sending money. I'm not angry, I'm clear. If any of you want a real relationship with me, it doesn't start with a voicemail asking for help. It starts with an honest conversation, a real one, where someone says what happened out loud and acknowledges it. Not we did our best, not that's in the past, not family is family. An apology, specific, for the fund, for the lies, for 7 years of telling this town I was in a facility while I was building a career. Until that happens, I wish you well, but my answer is no." I read it twice, changed nothing, pressed send. A week later, I called Mr. Weatherby, the lawyer in Columbus, retired now at 81 but still sharp. "Your grandmother was remarkable," he said. "She came to me specifically because she didn't trust your mother with those accounts. She made me promise to keep the original documents." I didn't find out about the forgery until later. By then the statute of limitations was running. I should have done more. The $12,000 was legally gone, but I'd been thinking about what Grandma Ruth would have wanted, not revenge, legacy. I contacted Portland State's financial aid office and set up a small annual scholarship, funded from my own salary, for students estranged from their families. Students who checked no family contribution not because their parents couldn't pay but because their parents wouldn't. I named it the Ruth Lawson Community Scholarship. The university posted the announcement with a photo from the box, 6-year-old me grinning with a gap in my teeth, Grandma Ruth behind me with her hands on my shoulders. It wasn't about the money. It was about rewriting the ending. My grandmother spent her whole life being polite about her own cage. She never left, never spoke up. She stayed and was afraid and died surrounded by people who underestimated her. I named a scholarship after her. Let them find that. Patricia called 3 days after the fundraiser, crying before I even said hello. "I should have said something years ago," she said. "I watched your mother do this to you, and I sat there like everyone else." "You're saying it now," I told her. "That counts." "It doesn't feel like enough," she said. "It's not, but it's a start." She told me the town wouldn't stop talking, that my mother couldn't walk into the post office without someone bringing it up, that Pastor Briggs had asked her to step back from the committee. I asked Patricia why she'd never stopped my mother from forging my signature. "Because I was afraid she'd do to me what she did to you," she said, "and I'm ashamed of that every day." I told her I needed time before we built anything. She said she understood. "Take whatever you need." For the first time, the word family didn't taste bitter in my mouth, just complicated. In Ridgewood, Reputation is currency, and my mother had just filed for bankruptcy. The story she'd spent 7 years constructing came apart like wet paper. People recalibrated what they thought they knew, not as gossip exactly, but as a collective correction, and it spread because it was true. Pastor Briggs called her personally, suggested gently but finally that she step back from the committee for a season. She resigned publicly and told people it was time to focus on family, the irony sitting in that sentence like a stone in a shoe. My father did something I never expected. He moved into the guest bedroom, not a separation, just a door closed between him and the woman he'd enabled for 30 years. Patricia overheard him say, through the kitchen window, "You lied about your own daughter. You told this whole town she was broken, and she stood on that stage and proved you wrong without saying your name." My mother's response was that I had turned the town against her. His was that she'd done that herself 7 years ago. I'd just shown up. It was the first honest sentence my father had spoken in my lifetime. Too late to save us, maybe not too late to save himself. Meredith lost the house. Without a cosigner, the loan fell through, and the bank completed the foreclosure 60 days later. She moved back into my parents' house, into my old bedroom, the one with nail holes where my posters used to be. I felt something sadder than satisfaction. The recognition that Meredith had never been given the tools to build anything on her own, every scaffolding in her life constructed by our mother, the school, the job, the redirected fund money. And when the scaffolding came down, there was nothing underneath. Being the golden child is its own kind of cage. You just don't notice the bars because they're gilded. Meredith never apologized, kept telling people that if I'd just helped, none of this would have happened. Still pointing, still a Lawson. But Patricia told me she'd seen Meredith standing in the doorway of my old room one night, running her finger along the nail hole where Grandma Ruth's photo used to hang, standing there a long time without saying a word. Kyle's reckoning came from his girlfriend, who saw his public Facebook post calling me ungrateful and told him, while packing an overnight bag, "That's not who I want to be with." He deleted the post, but screenshots had already circulated through Ridgewood's text chains faster than any newspaper. He was 27 and learning for the first time that actions on a screen have weight in the real world. My father's letter arrived at my office 6 weeks after the fundraiser, by mail, in his careful slanted handwriting. "Selena, I don't know if I have the right to say this, but I'm sorry. Not for your mother, for me. For sitting in that chair and saying nothing, for every time I told you don't make your mother upset when I should have told her to stop. I wasn't keeping the peace, I was keeping my comfort. You deserve a father who chose you even when it was loud. I didn't, and I'll carry that." I read it twice, set it in my desk drawer, and didn't respond. It was the first apology I'd received from a Lawson, from the person I expected it from last. 3 months after the fundraiser, on a Sunday evening in June, I'm standing in my kitchen stirring a pot of pasta while Jess argues with my neighbor about hot sauce on garlic bread. Margaret is on my couch telling a story about a grant proposal gone sideways. Colleagues are setting my dining table, the one I bought at an estate sale, 6 chairs, oak, scratched and imperfect, and mine. This is my Sunday dinner, every week. Same people give or take, no obligations, no performances, everyone here because they want to be. I think about another table, a longer one set with better china in a house in Ohio where I was invisible. This table is smaller, the plates don't match, the wine is cheap, and I have never felt more seen in my life. My father's letter still sits in my desk drawer. I haven't replied. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. My mother hasn't contacted me since my email, neither has Meredith. Kyle sent a one-word text 2 weeks ago. "Sorry." No period, no follow-up. I saw it. I haven't responded. I don't know what happens next with any of them, and for the first time in my life, I'm okay with not knowing. The door isn't locked, but it isn't open either. It's just there, waiting for someone to knock with something more than 2 words. Until then, I have pasta, I have wine, I have this table. That's enough. If you recognize any of this, the scapegoat role, the voicemails that only come when someone needs something, the narrative someone else wrote about your life while you were still living it, the family that doesn't call on your birthday but calls the moment they see a $sign, you're not crazy, you're not ungrateful, you're not selfish. Those words, the ones they throw at you when you refuse to shrink, are the sound of someone losing control of a story they never had the right to tell. The two words my family said were "help me." The two words I needed to hear were "I'm sorry." They're not the same sentence, and you don't owe anyone the first until they've given you the second. I used to think family meant loyalty, showing up no matter what, swallowing your own voice so the table stays quiet and everyone can pretend the silence is peace. Now I know better. Family is about choice. Real family, the kind worth keeping, chooses you on purpose, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, not because your name is useful on a loan application. The bravest thing I ever did wasn't walking out that door with $200 in my pocket and snow on the ground. It was not walking back in when they finally called, and all they had to offer was two words that weren't an apology. My name is Selena Lawson. I'm 30 years old, and the most expensive thing I own isn't a title or a salary, it's the silence I can finally afford. Grandma Ruth once told me the quietest person in the room is usually the one paying the most attention. She was right. I was paying attention, and eventually I paid myself first.